primetime address. President Joe Biden proposes tax hikes to pay for a huge expansion of child care. Republican reaction. Lawmakers on Capitol Hill respond to the president's plan. Coronavirus crisis. Americans adapt to new guidelines while cases surge overseas. And the power of prayer. The Vatican announces an initiative to try to end the global pandemic. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, April 28th, 2021. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. We are learning tonight that the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops will soon decide whether President Joe Biden should be allowed to take part in the Holy Eucharist based on his public support for abortion. It comes as the president prepares to address Congress, pushing his American Families Plan. White House correspondent Owen Jensen starts off our team coverage tonight. Owen?
Tracy, good evening. You've heard the White House describe the president as a devout Catholic. We know he goes to church often, prays the rosary, but it's his stance on abortion that has bishops on the cusp of making a very big decision.
President Joe Biden recently attending Mass at St. Joseph on the Brandywine in Delaware. But his support for Planned Parenthood, revoking the Mexico City policy, and flipping on the Hyde Amendment, among other things, contradict church teaching on protecting human life.
We are all sons and daughters of God.
And come this June, Catholic bishops will decide on whether to develop a document that would demand President Biden and other pro-abortion politicians not receive communion, a public rebuke. Archbishop Joseph Naumann of Kansas City, who chairs the USCCB's Committee on Pro-Life Activities, says such a stance by a public figure is a grave moral evil. According to church law, people in persistent sin should not receive communion. During the presidential campaign, a priest in South Carolina denied communion to then-candidate Joe Biden, but critics say denying communion is tantamount to a weaponization of the Eucharist. Meanwhile, tonight, the president lays out before Congress that sweeping proposal with a staggering $1.8 trillion price tag. It includes 2 years of free community college, $225 billion for child care, and monthly payments of at least $250 to parents, and hitting the wealthy with higher taxes.
We're really talking about the very wealthiest in this country paying their fair share in order to make investments in things like universal pre-K and paid family leave.
Grover Norquist from Americans for Tax Reform blasts the tax hikes, writing, Biden wants to take the U.S. business tax higher than China's and Europe and hike the capital gains tax higher than Jimmy Carter.
Now back to that USCCB document for a moment. Even if it's agreed the president should not present himself for communion, it would be up to individual bishops where the president worships and whether he is welcome to receive Holy Communion. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
Well, ahead of the president's speech, EWTN News Nightly caught up with lawmakers from across the country to get their take on how the president will sell his American Family Plan to the people. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales continues our coverage.
Lawmakers on both sides of the fence are already reacting to the president's American Family Plan and its $1.8 trillion price tag. I asked Democratic congressional leadership how President Biden is going to sell the plan to the American people.
Pre-K is overwhelmingly popular. Paid family and sick leave is overwhelmingly popular. Helping child care is overwhelmingly popular. Free community college is overwhelmingly popular. What the public has to do and we have to do is sell it to some of our Republican colleagues.
And the cost?
It wasn't too much money when they were handing out tax cuts to people who didn't need them. And I think we just need to change our priorities. And our priorities should be working families.
This plan is on top of the Americans' Job Plan with an estimated $2.5 trillion cost, and the American Rescue Plan that's already been passed, coming in at $1.9 trillion.
With regard to the direction of the Biden administration so far, I think it could best be described as the Biden bait and switch.
Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell and others say the president may have ran as a moderate but continues the radical liberal agenda.
We see a number of steps right now to go completely against who we are as a United States of America, packing the court, the Green New Deal, extreme spending on liberal wish lists.
Senator John Thune says most Americans would trade government assistance for a well-paying job, and adds those jobs won't come by increasing corporate taxes to pay for President Biden's plans.
Hiking the corporate tax rate will have negative consequences for our economy and for hardworking Americans.
On a side note, White House officials say that there will be no designated survivor when President Biden addresses Congress because most of the cabinet will be watching the speech from home due to COVID restrictions. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
Ecuador's Diocese of Riobamba will have new leadership. Pope Francis has accepted the retirement of Bishop Julio Paria Diaz, who turned 75 last month, as well as the resignation of the bishop's deputy last February. The temporary administrator is Bishop Bolivar Piedra. The priority will be addressing a missionary's reports of clerical immorality. Well, the Holy See and the Order of Malta recently presented Pope Francis's Fratelli Tutti letter. The encyclical, meaning all brothers, is on fraternity. A friend of the Pope's and a rabbi took part in the conference.
The core of the Jewish Christian vision about what humankind, what humanity should be. Brothers, fraternity.
And we thank our colleague Christian Peschkin from EWTN TV in Germany, who spoke with the rabbi. A Vatican official says church law does not conflict with pastoral care in terms of the annulment or dissolution of marriages. The Holy See's Office for the Doctrine of the Faith recently hosted a study day on the dissolution of marriages. Vatican officials stress the importance of pastoral care during the process. They say there is no difference between considering such cases and caring for the spiritual well-being of those involved. Joining us now with more insight is Hannah Brockhaus, senior Rome correspondent for Catholic News Agency. Hannah, it's so good to see you again. Can you tell us a little bit more about the study day and also why it was held now?
Well, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith organized this study day together with the Pontifical Lateran University for Catholic University students, for scholars, and for people who work in diocesan curias. And it was based on a 2001 instruction called Potestas Ecclesiae, which was on something called the dissolution of marriage in favor of the faith. And this study day was held now because it is 20 years, the 20th anniversary of that instruction. The instruction says that marriages between non-Catholics, of which at least one is not baptized, under certain conditions can be dissolved by the Bishop of Rome in favor of the faith and for the salvation of souls. So this study day was to deepen the look into the Code of Canon Law on that issue.
Hannah, can you tell us a little bit more about the dissolution of marriage in favor of the faith? Is this different from annulment?
Yes, it is different from annulment. So while an annulment is the Catholic Church's declaration that a prior marriage was invalid for some obstacle, that in fact valid marriage never took place, the dissolution of marriage recognizes that a valid marriage took place between two non-Catholic persons, and afterward, if one of the spouses in the marriage decided to become Catholic and was baptized, if there became some sort of irreconcilable difference related to the Catholic spouse not being able to practice their faith, it recognizes that there could be a specific set of circumstances when the Pope alone could offer a dispensation, a granting of this favor of the dissolution of that marriage. And so that is how they are different.
And Hannah, what more did the head of the Vatican's Doctrine of Faith have to say?
Cardinal Luis Ladaria, who is the prefect of the CDF, he gave a speech at this study day, and the main point that he was trying to make was about how the Church's law, because this dissolution of marriages, it's governed by the Church's law on marriage, how the law is not in contradiction or in conflict with the pastoral care of souls or pastoral accompaniment, conversations that the Church is having, especially in the wake of Pope Francis's apostolic exhortation, Amoris Laetitia. does the church's law have consideration for this? And Cardinal Ladaria said it does. I'm going to quote what Cardinal Ladaria said. He quoted Canon 1063 of the Code of Canon Law, which says pastors of souls are obliged to take care that their ecclesiastical community offers the Christian faithful the assistance by which the matrimonial state is preserved in a Christian spirit and advances in perfection. So Ladaria emphasized already written into the church's law are these ways of promoting the pastoral care of souls, especially in these difficult situations, which often include perhaps a marriage in crisis or otherwise a marriage that has failed. And he emphasized that the whole process that the church requires in this 2001 instruction about the dissolution of marriage, built into the process that is legally required, are things like questioning of the spouses, ensuring that the spiritual care and accompaniment is taken care of.
Well, Hannah, thank you so much for joining us today and talking to us about this. We really appreciate it. Hannah Brockhaus, Senior Rome Correspondent for Catholic News Agency. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Coming up, abortion coverage mandate. 2 Catholic dioceses appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. And protecting unborn babies, the new pro-life law in Arizona. Arizona's Governor Doug Ducey has signed a ban on abortions which are based on a prenatal genetic diagnosis such as Down syndrome. It imposes potential felony charges against a doctor in such cases. The new law also requires remains of aborted babies to be buried or cremated. 2 Catholic dioceses are among the groups appealing to the Supreme Court against the state of New York's abortion coverage mandate. Lawyers are hoping the nation's highest court will hear an appeal regarding New York's requirement that employers cover abortions in their employee health insurance plans. Lawyers say the organizations are being forced to choose between violating their core beliefs, being financially crushed, or closing down services. The petition includes Catholic and Anglican nuns as well as Baptist and Lutheran churches. Joining us now is Eric Baxter, Senior Counsel at Becket Fund for Religious Liberty. Eric, welcome back. Thank you so much for your time today. Tell us a little bit about this appeal to the Supreme Court. New York granted a religious exemption to its abortion coverage mandate, but you say that it was too narrow. Tell us about that.
That's right. Well, you've heard of the contraception mandate that we dealt with a couple of years ago, for a number of years, in fact. And now the state of New York is ratcheting things up, not even hiding behind the moniker of contraception anymore, and directly mandating that all employers that provide insurance to their employees cover abortion. Now, the state has said it will exempt religious organizations that stay in their churches and only preach to their own members. But if you open the doors to welcome people of other faiths, or if you open your doors to go out and serve people of other faiths or of no faith at all, then you lose the exemption. And of course, all religious organizations reach out to people of all faiths and of no faith to share their message, to serve, to do good works. And so the exemption really is almost meaningless. And so we've asked the Supreme Court to say that that is unconstitutional for the state to pick which religious organizations are religious enough to get an exemption.
I know that you are representing a number of organizations in this case. Tell us more about that, and also what comes next.
Yeah, there are, as you mentioned earlier, this is a very diverse coalition. We have Religious Sisters St. Mary from the Anglican tradition, Catholic Sisters of the Carmelite Order, a Baptist Church, a Lutheran Church, who are all parties to this proceeding, and many people of other faiths. Jewish, Islamic, Latter-day Saints are also joining as friends of the court to file briefs supporting the petition and asking the court to grant a broader exemption. So what we filed our petition last Friday. The state of New York will have an opportunity to oppose our petition, and then the court will decide sometime this summer or early in the fall whether to hear the case. But we're very hopeful that it will see this as a gross violation of religious organizations' First Amendment rights.
Another case I'm going to talk about that's receiving a lot of attention as well is Mahanoy Area School District versus BL. I understand oral arguments were heard today in the Supreme Court. Can you tell us more about that case, why it's significant, also how it could impact religious freedom?
Sure, that case involved a cheerleader who was frustrated after she was cut from the cheerleading team for swearing on Snapchat. In her frustration, she was frustrated the way that she hadn't made the team or made the varsity team, and so she expressed in vulgar terms her disappointment and was cut from the team entirely for a full year. We defended her right to free speech because schools should not be able to punish students for speech that they make off campus. And this is especially important for religious students who may want to share views that others see as controversial, and then are punished if their views cause disruption on campus because students disagree with them. And so we've joined many other parties ranging across the political spectrum to ask the court to uphold the right of students to speak off campus freely without fear of punishment, and also to protect the right of parents to direct the religious education of their children, especially when they're not on school grounds.
Eric, we probably have about 30 seconds left, but quickly, I was wondering, do you have any updates as far as worship restrictions due to COVID-19? Anything else you can tell us about that?
So we are happy to say that restrictions have been falling down across the country, thanks in part to the litigation that we've participated in and challenging restrictions. Almost all states across the country now have removed their numerical caps on worship, and just a few states have percentage caps that are that we think will also soon fall. But we are pleased to see the Supreme Court, after multiple rulings, making very, very clear that states cannot and local governments cannot discriminate against religious believers who want to worship by granting exceptions for secular businesses while still requiring churches to impose limits. And so the Supreme Court, we're grateful to say, has done great work in this area.
Yeah, good news there. All right. Well, thank you so much, Eric Baxter, Senior Counsel at Becket. Thanks again.
Always a pleasure.
Apollo 11 astronaut Michael Collins passed away today at the age of 90 after a bout with cancer. Collins had no regrets about his assigned role as command module pilot during the historic lunar landing mission. In his autobiography, he wrote, "I was born in the days of biplanes and Buck Rogers, learned to fly in the early jets, and hit my peak when moon rockets came along. That's hard to beat." Up next, tracking COVID-19, what you should know about the ongoing outbreak. And Christian meditation. Pope Francis describes a good way to encounter Christ. India continues to suffer from a devastating surge of coronavirus cases. The health ministry reports a record of nearly 3,300 COVID-19 deaths and nearly 363,000 new infections in the past 24 hours. India's coronavirus fatalities now exceed 201,000. The Netherlands is the latest European nation to emerge cautiously from a coronavirus lockdown. January's nationwide curfew had sparked strong protests, which continued through yesterday's annual King's Day holiday. That curfew has now been lifted. Outdoor dining and limited non-essential shopping are now returning. Well, as we reported yesterday, the Centers for Disease Control recently released new coronavirus guidelines on Tuesday. They say fully vaccinated Americans can go outdoors without wearing a mask. The easing of mask suggestions also, in some cases, applies to those who have not been fully vaccinated. Joining us now to talk more about this is Dr. Bob Lahita, Director of the Institute for Autoimmune and Rheumatic Diseases at St. Joseph Health. He is also a clinical professor of medicine at Rutgers, New Jersey Medical School and professor at New York Medical College. Dr. Lahita, welcome back. Always great to see you. Let's talk a little bit more about these new mask guidelines. The CDC says fully vaccinated people, meaning those who've had both shots, can go maskless outdoors with some exceptions. Can you talk more about that and also your thoughts on the new guidance and what it signals?
Yes, Tracy, it signals that when you're vaccinated, you're protected. We have real world data now with thousands, indeed millions of people who have been vaccinated, and it is clear that the infection does not spread from individual to individual in those who have received the vaccine. You have to be 2 weeks out from your second injection or 2 weeks out from your first injection if you have one of those single injection vaccines. So you're basically protected, which means that small groups of people inside and outside, if you've been vaccinated, do not have to wear masks. Now, still in public places like churches, temples, synagogues, you do not know who in that congregation is still unvaccinated and therefore is capable of transmitting the infection or of even receiving the infection from someone else. So there's still possibly super spreader events. But if you're vaccinated, you're fairly protected. If you're jogging in a park, you don't have to wear a mask. If you're outdoors at a picnic or barbecue and you're with other vaccinated people, you don't have to wear a mask. It's those people who are unvaccinated or not vaccinated that are at risk of spreading and of receiving the virus.
Well, as we know, as the CDC did ease those mask restrictions for outdoors, what about indoors for those who are fully vaccinated and for those who aren't? And also, what did the CDC have to say about that?
Well, the CDC said that if you're indoors and you know that your family's been vaccinated, you don't have to wear a mask. In fact, we suggested you didn't have to wear a mask beforehand if you knew that the people in your home were not exposed to the virus. But one never knows. So vaccination is the way to go. That's a sure thing, a sure test of the fact that you are now going to be resistant to infection. Of course, little children, like grandchildren, etc., are usually not really susceptible. If they do get infected, they're asymptomatic, and most children have not been out and about in an area where, or in groups where they could be infected. So this is good news. It means that if you're vaccinated, you don't have to wear a mask anymore. But remember, when you're in public places like theaters, football games, baseball games, you really do have to wear your mask and social distance.
Dr. Lahita, we probably have about a minute or so left, but I want to get to this last question. There have been reports that millions of people are not getting their second doses of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. What more do you know about that? And what are the concerns there regarding skipping that second dose?
Well, the second dose is there for a reason. This messenger RNA Moderna and Pfizer vaccine requires the booster dose. The data from the phase 3 clinical trials indicated that the second dose was essential to provide good cellular and humoral immunity, which means antibodies and cellular immunity. If it's going to be effective, you've got to get the second dose. And people who are going and not getting the second dose are really not fully vaccinated.
Well, Dr. Lajita, thank you so much for coming on. Always appreciate your expert advice. Dr. Bob Lahita, thank you again for joining us.
Thanks.
Pope Francis is launching a rosary marathon to pray for an end to the coronavirus pandemic. The month-long prayer begins Saturday afternoon. The Holy Father will pray the rosary from St. Peter's Basilica. From there, Marian shrines around the world will pray the rosary every day until the end of May. And finally tonight, Pope Francis says meditation is a perfect way to encounter Jesus Christ.
Meditare per noi cristiani è un modo di incontrare Gesù.
At his weekly talk at the Vatican, the Holy Father said Christian meditation is different from other meditative practices around the world since Christians come in contact with Jesus and we discover ourselves through these encounters. Pope Francis adds meditation is not drawing into ourselves, but into Christ. And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.